The docking bay of the Sorvith's wings smelled like cooling metal and engine oil. The lights were bright. The floor was clean enough to reflect a face in it. Everything was exactly as Commander Leff liked it. Orderly, precise, controlled. Then the human walked in dragging a bag that was clearly too heavy for a regulation pack, wearing a jacket with a small yellow patch on the sleeve that said Earth Geology Survey. "We dig it." She stopped in the middle of the docking bay, looked up at the ceiling, and said, out loud to no one in particular, "Oh, that is a beautiful ship." Commander Leff, who had 6 limbs and the patience of a very tired teacher, read the file in his hand one more time. Name, Dara Osei. Age, 34. Occupation, field geologist, transferred to Galactic Alliance Exploration Division. Homeworld, Earth. Notable incidents. Survived a volcanic eruption in 2041. Survived 2 separate maritime shipwrecks. Survived a tunnel collapse during a survey dig. All incidents listed under a section the human had titled Things That Made Me a Better Scientist. Leff folded the file slowly. He had served in space for 22 years. He had never once listed a near-death experience as a learning opportunity. Nav Officer Soren appeared at his shoulder, young and nervous, his thin fingers pressed together. "Is that her?" "That is her," said Leff. "She looks small. Humans often do." Dara had stopped dragging her bag. She pulled out a small device and pointed it at the engine ports along the far wall. A soft click. She looked at the image and smiled to herself. Soren leaned closer. "Is she taking photographs of our engines?" "It appears so. Should we be concerned?" Leff thought about the file. The eruption. The tunnel collapse. The section titled Things That Made Me a Better Scientist. "I believe," said Leff, "that we should simply proceed." Soren was assigned to take Dara through orientation. He had a full list ready. Emergency exits. Crew protocols. Communication frequencies. Dietary notes. Dara shook his hand when he introduced himself. She did it firmly and looked directly at him, which almost no species did on a first meeting. "Your eyes have extra membranes," she said. "For pressure changes?" Soren blinked all 4 eyelids. "Mostly yes." "That is so cool," she said, completely sincere. They were, after that, more or less fine. Soren took her through the corridors. She asked questions constantly. Not rude ones, careful ones. She wanted to know how the atmosphere processors worked, why the gravity panels in Section C had a slightly different hum, whether the coating on the observation windows was for heat or radiation. She noticed things no first-day crew member had ever noticed. She also stopped twice to photograph hallway junctions that Soren had walked through 1,000 times without finding interesting. He did not understand her, but he was not afraid of her the way he had expected to be. Then the alarm went off. It was a drill, a routine ship-wide emergency drill that Leff ran every 15 days. All crew members knew what it meant. They had all been briefed. Everyone moved fast. In the Velhari way, emergency drills were taken with full seriousness, because the habit of panic was the habit of survival. The corridors filled with the sound of 6-limbed beings moving at speed, clicking signals to one another, eyes wide and membranes snapping shut. Soren immediately grabbed the wall rail and turned to check on Dara. She was walking. Not fast, not slow, just walking, one hand adjusting the collar of her jacket, the other still holding the last nutrition bar she had picked up from the orientation desk. She took a bite of it. She looked mildly curious about the alarm lights cycling on the ceiling, the way someone might look at a mildly interesting cloud formation. "Is this a drill?" she asked. "Yes," said Soren, breathless for no physical reason. "Thought so," she said. "The pattern repeats. Drills usually pulse in 3s. Real emergencies go continuous." She took another bite. "Where's my station?" Soren pointed. She nodded and walked there at the same calm pace. At the end of the drill, Commander Leff stood at the front of the assembly hall and reviewed the response times. All crew had performed within acceptable range. Leff paused when he got to the last entry on his board. "Crew member Osei," he said. "Your station arrival was within regulation time." "Yes, sir," said Ura. "You were not running." "No, sir. I didn't need to." Leff looked at her for a long moment. She looked back at him without any particular emotion. Not defiance, not nervousness. Just attention. After the assembly, Dr. Ara pulled Leth aside. She had been watching Dara the entire drill from the medbay monitors. Her heart rate during the alarm, Ara said, showing him the data. It went up by 4 points. 4. Mine went up by 40, and I knew it was a drill. Leth studied the numbers. What does that tell you? Ara was quiet for a moment. Either she is the calmest being I have ever seen, she said, or she has experienced enough real emergencies that a simulated one barely registers. Leth said nothing. He went to his desk and began his first report to the Galactic Council. He stared at the blank space for a long time. Then he wrote, "The human is performing within expected parameters. She is, however, unusual. Further observation recommended." He saved the file. Then he sat back and thought about volcanic eruptions listed as learning opportunities and calm footsteps during an alarm and the soft click of a device taking a photograph of an engine room no one else had ever thought to photograph. Outside his window, the stars moved slowly past. 3 days into the journey, the Sorvatha's wing entered the Dravath debris field. It was what remained of a star that had collapsed 400 years ago. The field stretched across 11 million kilometers, a slow, drifting graveyard of rock, metal shards, and frozen gas clouds. Every piece of it was a different size. Some were the size of a fist. Some were the size of a building. They moved without pattern and without warning, and the ship had to navigate at 1/4 speed, sensors active at full range, crew at ready stations. That IT was not a dangerous mission. It was a careful one. There is a difference. Dara had been told this during the briefing. She had nodded and asked 3 intelligent questions about the field's composition, and then asked if there was an observation deck with a clear viewport. Soren had said yes, on the port side of level 2. She had nodded again, the way someone nods when they've already decided what they're going to do. She was on that observation deck 4 hours later, nose practically pressed to the viewport glass, watching broken pieces of a dead star drift past in the dark. The rocks caught the distant light of 2 far-off suns and threw it back in strange colors. Deep orange, cold blue, a white that was too bright to look at directly. Dust clouds moved through the field like slow breath. Every few minutes, something would tumble past close enough that she could see its texture, its cracks, the frozen minerals along its edges. She thought it was the most beautiful thing she had seen in her life. She pulled out her device and took a photograph. Then the alarm went off. Not the drill pattern. Continuous. A micrometeorite storm had activated without warning at the field's interior edge. Small, fast particles traveling at high velocity, drawn together by a local gravity shift in the debris. It was a level 3 emergency, the kind that made experienced Velhari crew members move at full speed. All across the ship, membranes snapped. Feet hit floors hard. Let's voice came over the channel giving direct orders in sharp, clipped tones. Everyone had a job. Everyone moved to do it. Security Officer Dan was sent to retrieve the human from the observation deck. Standard procedure. All non-essential crew to safety stations during a level 3. He moved fast, already preparing a polite but firm instruction in his head. He opened the observation deck door. Dara was still at the viewport. She had not moved away from it. She had, in fact, moved closer. She was holding her device up beside her own face, angled so that the viewport was behind her and the rocks outside, one of which had just caught a burst of particle light and was glowing a deep red at its center, were visible just over her shoulder. She was smiling, not the tense smile of someone pretending to be calm. A real smile. The click of her device sounded once. Dan stood in the doorway and stared at her. She looked over, noticed him, and lowered the device. "Is it bad out there?" "It is a level 3 emergency," he said. She looked back at the viewport for a moment, evaluating. "The particles are small. I can see the size from here. Fast but small." She looked at him again. "Is the hull rated for micrometeorite impact?" "Yes, but then we're fine." She held up the device. The light was perfect. I had maybe 30 seconds before that rock drifted out of frame. She followed him to her safety station without argument, device in her jacket pocket, completely relaxed. Doctor Ara ran a scan on Dara in the medical bay afterward. Not because Dara had asked for one, because Ara needed to understand what she had seen on the monitors. A human standing at a viewport during a level 3 alarm with a heart rate that had increased by, at most, 11 points. Does anything feel wrong? Ara asked, running the scanner slowly. No, said Dara. I'm hungry, but that's not new. Were you frightened? During the alarm? Dara thought about it. A little. I didn't know if the hull rating covered the particle velocity at that specific angle. But I did a quick calculation and decided it probably did. Ara looked at her scan results for a long time. There was nothing wrong with Dara's brain. No suppressed fear response. Non neurological irregularity. The pathways that process danger were all intact and functioning. She simply had, in real time, weighed the risk and concluded it was acceptable, and then continued taking a photograph. The image came out well, Dara added. Do you want to see it? Ara looked at the photograph. A human face, smiling, and behind it a glowing red rock drifting through a field of debris, with the dark of deep space spreading out behind everything. It was, Ara admitted privately, a striking image. She showed it to Commander Leth that evening without comment. Leth looked at it for a while. His expression did not change. She knew the hull would hold, Ara said. She calculated it herself. In how long? Seconds. Leth handed the image back and added to his report. Crew member Osei demonstrated non-standard threat assessment during the Level 3 incident. No neurological irregularity found. She simply measured the risk differently than we do. He paused. Then he added one more line. I'm beginning to wonder if she measures most things differently than we do. Soren, who had not been told any of this, started a private log that same night. He wrote only one line in it. Day 4 with a human. I am beginning to think she does not fully know she is mortal. He stared at the line for a while. Then he left it as it was. It was Soren's idea. He would later wonder if it had been a good one that the cultural exchange session was a standard part of the crew integration program. Every member of the crew was invited to share something from their home world, a song, a food, an image, a story. It was meant to build familiarity. On most mixed-species ships, it produced polite interest and a few awkward silences. On the Sorvith's wing, with Dar present, it went differently. The first few crew members shared without incident. One played a short recording of singing insects from the Velhari marshlands. Another showed images of the food markets in the capital city of their home continent. A young crew member named Finn brought out a small wooden object that his family had passed down for 8 generations and held it up briefly, and then put it away again with the care of someone holding something much heavier than wood. Then it was Dara's turn. She had her device ready. She had prepared something, she said, that would help explain where she came from. She thought it might also explain some things about her that the crew had probably been wondering about. Leth, watching from the side of the room, thought, at last, Dara started with the planet itself. She showed them footage of Earth's oceans, deep, dark, wide enough that you could not see across them. She showed them the storm systems that crossed entire continents. She showed them a volcano erupting at night, the lava moving like a slow river of orange fire, the ash cloud rising so high it bent the light above it. The crew watched without speaking. Then she showed them the animals, not the small ones. She went directly to the large predators, the kind with too many teeth, the kind that moved faster than they should for their size, the kind that had evolved over millions of years into something very good at killing. She showed one hunting sequence, and the crew made a collective sound that was not quite a word. This is where you live? Soren asked quietly. This is where I'm from, said Dara. Not all of it is like that, but enough of it is. Then she showed them human history. She kept it brief because it had to be brief. There was too much of it. She showed them wars. She showed them the aftermath of plagues. She showed them photographs of cities reduced to rubble and, on the next image, those same cities rebuilt. She showed a graph of every mass extinction event Earth had survived and a second graph of human population growth after every major catastrophe. The room was very quiet. Ambassador Gurith, observing the session through a remote feed, set down the document he had been reading and did not pick it up again. How? Said Fun, who was holding his wooden heirloom again without seeming to realize it. Did your species not disappear? Dara thought about it. We almost did, she said. More than once. I think what happened is we got used to it. Every time something tried to end us, the ones who survived were the ones who could keep going anyway. So we did. She paused. We also got good at helping each other. Humans are not the strongest animals on Earth, not the fastest. We survived because we stayed together. Commander Leth asked, because he needed to ask it. Is there anything your species is afraid of? Dara was quiet for a moment. It was not the quiet of someone avoiding the question. It was the quiet of someone giving it honest thought. Losing people, she said. Not dying ourselves, really. Losing the ones we love. Forgetting someone who mattered. Being in a quiet room after someone is gone and knowing the quiet is permanent. She looked at her device for a moment and then set it down. That is the thing that actually keeps us up at night. Not the volcanoes. Not the storms. The small quiet things. Nobody spoke. Soren was looking at his own hands. Finn had his wooden object pressed flat against his chest. Even Security Officer Dan, who stood near the door, was looking at the floor with an expression that had nothing to do with professionalism. Doctor Ara, who had spent days studying Dara's brain scans and finding nothing wrong with them, sat very still and thought, I had the diagnosis backwards. There is nothing missing in her. There is simply more present. In his quarters. Girith opened a new section in his report to the Galactic Council. He had come aboard this observation assignment, expecting to document behavioral anomalies. What he wrote instead was this: reconsider all prior threat assessments regarding humans. We have been measuring the wrong variables entirely. Recommend full Alliance membership review at earliest session. He read it back once. He did not change a word. The session ended without anyone officially ending it. People just stayed where they were for a while, not talking, which was sometimes the most honest response to a thing that had been said. Dara picked up her device and looked at the last image still on the screen, a photograph of a city rebuilt from rubble, streets full of people, windows lit from inside. She turned it off and said, simply, thanks for listening. Nobody saw the anomaly coming. That was the thing about micro-singularities. They did not announce themselves. One moment the space around the ship was clean and charted. The next, the sensor screamed that it was not a large singularity. Large ones were visible from far enough out that you could move away. This one was small, localized, and expanding. It had formed in the debris field's gravitational shadow, hidden behind mass readings from the surrounding rocks, and it was now approximately 40,000 kilometers from the Sorvith's wing and closing in terms of effective pull radius. Leth read the data and made the only call that made sense. Abandoned ship. Not because the ship was already lost, but because in 11 minutes it might be, and 11 minutes was enough time to evacuate if everyone moved right now. The ship had 8 escape pods. 7 of them launched without issue. Pod 7 did not launch. The rail mechanism that guided Pod 7 into its exit channel had a seize joint, a maintenance flag that had been logged 3 weeks ago as low priority and had not been fixed because it had not seemed urgent. It was urgent now. The pod sat in its bay, fully loaded, with Soren and 2 other crew members sealed inside, and it did not move. Leth heard the failure report over his channel 30 seconds after Pod 7's launch was supposed to happen. He was already in Pod 2. He looked at the data. He looked at the timer. He looked at the faces of the crew members already seated around him. He reached for the override to send his own pod to help free the rail. The math said he could not make it and return to safety in time. He reached anyway. Commander, Dara's voice over the open channel that he looked at the pod bay camera feed. She was not in her seat. She was in the corridor outside Pod 7's bay, toolkit in hand, already running. Say, he said. Your pod is the other direction. I know, she said. I'll be quick. I know the window, Commander. I can see the same timer you can. Her voice was even, not brave sounding, just focused, the way someone sound when they're doing a job. Get your pod clear. I'll get them out. Leth closed his eyes for 1 second. 1. Then he ordered Pod 2 away. The corridor outside Pod 7's bay was not stable. The singularity's pull had not reached the hull yet, but its gravitational fluctuation was already affecting the interior systems. Lights cycling between emergency red and full dark. The floor giving a low groan every few seconds, loose items floating gently to one side before gravity corrected and dropped them again. Dara moved through all of it without stopping. She had the access panel off the rail housing in 40 seconds. She had seen the engineering schematic during orientation. She had photographed it, in fact, because it had looked interesting, and she knew where the C's joint would be. T was in the secondary clamp, exactly where the schematic said a stress failure would most likely occur. She had the right tool already in her hand. She worked. The ship groaned. A panel above her cracked along its seam. She did not look up at some point during those 40 seconds. She became aware that her hands were shaking. Not a lot. Enough that she noticed. She was afraid. Her body had been keeping score even while her brain was busy, but her hands kept moving because they knew what to do. She freed the joint. The clamp released. The rail mechanism clicked back into alignment. Pod 7, she said into her channel. Try now. A half-second pause that felt much longer. Then the sound of the launch rail engaging and the deep thud of the pod separating from the ship. Soren's voice. We're clear. We're clear. And then, quieter, hurrah. Go, she said. About my pod. She ran. The corridor tilted slightly as she moved. Actual tilt, the ship's stabilizers compensating for what the singularity was doing to local gravity. She ran along it the way she had once run along a tilted ship deck in the South Atlantic during a storm, and she did not fall then either. She reached Pod 6. She sealed herself in. She launched. The pod cleared the hull, and the Sorvith's wing fell away behind her. 6 seconds later, the singularity's outer edge passed through the ship's stern, not destroying it, but tearing the rear third apart, hull plates peeling away, the engine compartment going dark. The ship held. Damaged, gutted in its rear but intact. It held. Dara sat in the pod. Her hands had stopped shaking. Through the small viewport, she could see the debris field and the damage, and, somewhere out there, 7 other pods with people in them who were alive. She breathed out slowly. Then something in her reached for her device before the rest of her had decided whether that was a reasonable thing to do. She took a photograph. The camera recorded her face in the foreground, tired, shaken, present, and the damaged ship behind her and the vast dark around everything. She looked at it for a moment. Then she put the device away. Outside, the stars were very still. The rescue ship arrived 7 hours later. It was a large vessel, a council-grade recovery ship called the Orith, and it collected all 8 pods with calm efficiency and brought everyone aboard. Nobody was badly hurt. Soren had a deep bruise along one arm for being thrown against the pod wall during the launch. One of the crew members who had been in Pod 7 with him had a small fracture in one of her secondary limbs. The ship's medical team treated both in under an hour. Dara had a cut on her left hand from the tool housing. She had not noticed it until someone pointed it out. Commander Leth sat with his crew in the Orith's recovery hall and said very little. He looked at each of them in turn. Then he looked at Dara, who was sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, toolkit beside her, eating something from a ration pack that someone had handed her. She looked tired. Not shaken, tired. The kind of tired that comes after a job is finished. Your suit camera was recording, Leth said. Dara looked up. It automatically activates during emergencies. Standard protocol. I know, said Leth. I need to review the footage. She nodded and handed him the device that he watched the footage in the recovery hall's side room with Ara and Soren standing behind him. He watched Ara run down the corridor, remove the access panel, identify the joint, and begin working. He watched the light cycle and the floor tilt and the ceiling panel crack. He watched her hands. Then he saw the moment. Approximately 40 seconds in, her hands paused for exactly 4 seconds. She turned her head, looked at the viewport behind her, with a clear line of sight to the singularity's outer edge and the breaking ship beyond, and she raised her device. The camera captured what she had captured. Her own face, close, tired, and behind it through the cracked viewport, the full chaos of what she was in the middle of. She was smiling, not performing calm, not pretending. The expression was small and real and had nothing theatrical about it. It was the smile of someone who, in the middle of something genuinely frightening, had noticed that the light was interesting 0.4 seconds. Then she put the device down and kept working. Soren made a sound behind Leth that was not quite a word. Ambassador Gurith reviewed the footage remotely and then sat alone for a long time. He requested a copy for the council record. Then he requested a second copy, officially classified as a historical document. The footage was brought before the Alliance Council 6 days later. It was watched by 43 council members in a closed session, and when it ended, the room held a silence that went on longer than most council silences that a senior Tharaki elder named Voss, who had served on the council for 60 years, asked for the footage to be replayed from the 4-second moment the IT played again. Dara's face, the broken ship behind her, the small, real smile, Voss said. She knew the danger. Yes, said Gurith. Her vital signs confirm it. Her fear response was fully active. But she stopped to do that. Yes. Why? Gurith considered this carefully. I believe that for humans, noticing something worth noticing is not separate from being alive. It is part of being alive. She did not stop because she was not afraid. She stopped because she was, and she found the moment worth recording. The council was quiet again. Dr. Ara, called to testify, spoke next. She had prepared a medical summary. She gave part of it, then set it aside. I spent days trying to find what was different in her, Ara said. I was looking for something missing, some suppressed response, some gap in the fear system. There is nothing missing. Her brain processes danger the way ours does. She feels it. She felt it in that corridor. Ara paused. She acted anyway. That is not absence of fear. That is something else entirely. Something we do not have a good word for. Soren was the last to speak. He said, she came back for us because that is what she does. Not because protocol said to. Not because she had calculated she would survive. She came back because we were her crew, and leaving was not something she was able to do. That is what they are like. I have spent weeks with one, and I am telling you, that is what they are like. Gurith's formal recommendation went to the council that evening. Full Alliance membership review for humanity. Expedited session. No further delay. The selfie was released to the public 3 days later, with Dar's permission. It spread across the Alliance's communication networks in less than a day. Most beings who saw it did not understand it first. Why would someone document themselves in that moment? The ones who looked at it longest were the ones who began to understand. There was something in the expression, something that said, I am here. This is real, and I am still paying attention. Soren added a second line to his private log that night. It said, I was wrong before. She knows exactly what she is. The Sorvitha's wing took 3 weeks to repair. The stern section was rebuilt from the frame outward, the engine compartment replaced entirely, the hull plates resealed by a team of Velhari engineers who worked 12-hour shifts and filed a report afterwards saying it was the most interesting structural damage pattern they had ever cataloged. When the ship was ready, the crew came back aboard. Not all ships get their crews back after an incident like that. Some crews scatter. Some request transfers. Some just stop being crews and become a collection of individuals who were once in the same place during something bad. The Sorvitha's wing crew came back. All of them. Leth stood at the top of the boarding ramp and watched them file in. He did not make a speech. He had considered one and decided against it. Some things do not need framing. Dara was the last aboard. She had a new toolkit. The old one had been lost in the pod. She had also, Leth noticed, already taken a photograph of the repaired stern section from the docking bay before boarding. She saw him watching her and gave a small shrug, as if to say, I cannot help it. He did not say anything about it. He stepped aside to let her through. The official commendation from the Galactic Alliance came 2 days into the new voyage. It was formal language, carefully worded, recognizing Dara's actions during the Singularity incident. Her name had been officially added to the Alliance's crew integration records under a new classification label that someone in the council office had created specifically for her file. The label read, Deathworld Crew Integration Successful. Dara read the document. Then she laughed, quietly, to herself. Then she sent a copy to her family on Earth. The message she attached to it said, Work was interesting this week. Soren ate lunch with her that afternoon. They sat in the small crew galley on level 1, which had slightly better light than the main hall and a viewport that looked out on open space. They talked about the debris field, about the engineering schematic she had photographed during orientation, about whether the C's joint had been a stress fracture or a manufacturing fault. Dara thought stress fracture. She had looked at the metal, and the break pattern was consistent with repeated pressure cycles. Soren listened to her explain it and thought. She noticed the schematic during her first week. She remembered it. She used it. And she's talking about the metallurgy of the joint as if the most interesting part of the whole incident was the engineering. He did not say any of this out loud. He just listened in his private quarters. Commander Leth wrote a personal message to Ambassador Gurith. Not an official report. A personal one. It said, I have served with many officers over 22 years. I have trusted my life to most of them. I want you to understand that if I were facing another situation like the one in the Dravath field, the first person I would want standing beside me is Dara Osei. Not because she is fearless. She is not fearless. But because when it matters, she does the thing that needs to be done, and she does not let the fear stop her hands from working. I do not know what word you use for that where you come from. We call it something. I'm still trying to find the right one. He sent it, then sat back in his chair. Down the hall, a small alert pinged at the bridge station. Soren checked it. A minor gravitational reading from a distant body. Almost certainly nothing. Worth a 30-second scan to confirm. He turned to report it and found that Dara had already stood up from her chair, toolkit in hand, and was walking toward the sensor console at her usual unhurried pace. I'll check it, she said. It is probably nothing, said Soren. Probably, she agreed. She did not slow down. Soren watched her go. Then he opened his private log and wrote the last entry he would write about her for a long time. Not because he ran out of things to notice, but because at some point a person stops being a subject of observation and starts just being someone you know. The entry said, I no longer think she does not know she is mortal. I think she knows exactly what she is. And I think that is precisely why nothing stops her. He closed the log. At the front of the ship, through the main viewport, the stars stretched out ahead of the Sorvith's wing in every direction. Uncountable, unhurried, vast, the ship moved forward into them, the way it always had.